Very good. Thank you. So first of all, thank you all very much for joining. We've got a bunch of people still jumping in here, and folks are going to continue to trickle in as we go. But I want to go ahead and get started because we've got a lot of really great ground to cover here. And I want to start by saying thank you very much first to ACG NextGen and TextChange. First of all, ACG NextGen is the young professionals arm of ACG Austin San Antonio. This has been a fantastic group for me. I encourage all of you to take a look at what they're doing for middle market companies and M&A deal flow in Central Texas. It's obviously a global organization, but I've had the privilege of helping start the Young Professionals Group, which is NextGen, which is a big part of why we're here talking today. Dylan Zwick is a member. I've developed a lot of great business friendships and even some really good ongoing personal friendships there. But ACG Austin San Antonio encompasses the growing Austin to San Antonio region, and we're the premier community of professionals providing content, access to capital, and connections in the middle market. And then I also wanted to do a shout out to TextChange because this is our second event with, or co-branded event with ACG and TextChange. And TextChange has been a fantastic advocate, not just for ACG, but for business leaders in and around Austin for a very long time. And they've become close personal friends of mine, so I'm really happy that we're able to do this for them as well. TextChange is a community of technology leaders and entrepreneurs who help move Austin's innovation sector forward. They bring together passionate senior executives and entrepreneurs who want to share ideas on what's current in business, learn from subject matter experts, and connect with potential collaborators. They have done an immense amount of work, both of these organizations, to bring you all together here today. And we couldn't be happier to have this many folks joining us. First, I'll tell you a little bit about myself. My name is Dave Lawson. I'm a business performance advisor with Insperity, and Insperity provides small and medium-sized businesses with HR and benefits administration relief. It's a big topic of conversation right now as we're working with newly discovered routines in quarantine. Through technology and direct service to our clients, we're able to provide benefits administration and payroll services to all of them in a way that is unique and robust, and I highly recommend you give us a call, talk to us a little bit about it. In addition to my 20+ years of experience in hospitality, real estate, and consulting, I've owned and operated 4 businesses in service, technology, and agricultural industries. My mission at Insperity is to help businesses succeed so communities prosper, and of course that is one of the reasons we're talking with John Nash today. John is the founder and managing director of MeadowLark Advisors. John founded MeadowLark Advisors with more than 20 years of senior management experience in a broad mix of companies. He served in the C-suite of more than 25 different companies and industries, including technology, healthcare, manufacturing, consumer products, construction, agriculture, media, retail. I'm not sure there's anything out there that you haven't done, John.
There's a few things. There's a lot of things. There's a lot of things.
I mean, it's amazing with what you're doing for companies. This is what your resume should look like, right? So thank you very much for bringing your insights to a much needed conversation around economics and the economic scenario we're now facing. Yeah, it really is an important conversation. That said, if you like, Dylan, you can start the polling questions. Thank you. And let's see if I can grab this real quick. If you all could take a moment to answer a few questions for us as we move forward. I'm just going to move on with introduction to our topics of the hour. So this webinar, The Road to Recovery, was born out of a conversation we first had several months ago, really. It started with Dylan Zwick. He had sent me a draft of a blog post he was already crafting in the early days of the Austin quarantine, in which he actually coins the phrase, the Great Pause. I thought that was really interesting. And in fact, through those conversations, he's introduced me to John Nash, who is in fact the managing director over at MeadowLark Advisors. And we've had no fewer than 7 calls between John Dillon and myself as I tried to really wrap my head around this great pause. Frankly, my greatest revelations during our talks came when I realized that we as a business community, we have a lot of work in front of us. And that's what we're going to be talking about today. Mostly we're going to be sort of bird dogging some of the key performance indicators for small and medium-sized businesses. And then John's going to be giving his insights on what we're really looking at in terms of solutions. So thanks again, John. I'd like to just start by suggesting you spend a lot of time talking with clients and partners in Texas. Through your conversations, what's the spectrum of sentiment among business leaders right now?
Thanks, Dave, and thanks to TechChange and ACG and Insperity. Those organizations have done a great job getting us together. We really appreciate it as well. You ask a really important first question, and I think it's incumbent upon all of us to recognize that people are hurting. People are in pretty significant state of stress and fear. There are, of course, sectors of the economy that are booming, and there are people and companies that are doing great. But by and large, there's a lot of economic pain that's being felt, and on top of that, there's obviously some pretty significant just fear and public health issue with the pandemic that's really gotten to the point where people are having to decide on their own how they're going to respond to it, and it creates a lot of tension in everybody's everyday life. So look, I think we're going to spend the day or the hour talking about business and how the business community can react and focus over the next year or two, but that all has to be in the context of a much larger and more serious situation with everything that's going on with COVID-19 and all the uncertainty that brings. So we'll try to bring some of that into the conversation today, but we're going to stay pretty focused on the business community and what it means. And there, you've got employees who are uncertain of their future. You've got business managers and owners who are struggling to do right by their stakeholders and especially right by their employees and their customers. But it's an immense challenge, and it can change based on geography. It can change based on the industry that you're in, and so it's a very difficult world to navigate right now. And I think we have to recognize that everybody's going to make mistakes. Everybody's going to do things that they wish they hadn't done. Hopefully the regrets won't be too deep, but at the end of the day, how we pivot from those things and how we move forward from those lessons that we learn and how quickly we adapt is going to make a real difference to how we get through this.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more, and I really appreciate you mentioning the employees, the line level workers who are out there trying to toe the line every day. Taking care of your employees can really make a big difference, and that's one of the things that I'm really proud of that we do for our clients. So thank you for mentioning that. It's a big piece of the puzzle. Do you feel like we're in a recession that'll correct within a couple of quarters, as has been predicted, or do you believe we're in for a long pandemic-driven economic cycle?
Look, I think that the predictions are now starting to creep out further and further, and there was a lot of talk about a V-shaped recovery, and that's certainly, it's popular to think there would be a V-shaped recovery, but or it's exciting to think that there would be. We don't really look at it that way at all. We think there's kind of a long series of events that are going to cascade through the economy over the next year or two. You mentioned the great pause early on, which I think everybody in hindsight can see that happened, right? Back in February and March, we all just stepped back and said, wow, this is a crazy situation. What are we going to do? And you saw this immediate demand drop across just a huge number of sectors of the economy, and some pretty amazing supply chain disruption that really compounded things. And it was immediate, right? It was just immediate. And we're kind of through that. And I won't say that we're in the second phase of the pandemic or the second wave of the pandemic, right? I don't think the first wave is really over, but regardless of your thoughts on that, we're now definitely in the second wave or the second phase of the economic cycle that we're going through right now. The Great Pause is over. A lot of those supply chain disruptions that were felt immediately, they got fixed pretty quickly. And there was a lot of very fast pivoting that went on to make that happen. And you saw some companies respond extraordinarily well. In Texas, the HEB story is one that I think everybody admires, and it's truly admirable. And there are other clear winners and strong performers out of this. But now as we get into this second phase, you're going to see companies experiencing loan defaults, covenant defaults, or maybe payment defaults. You're going to see a lot of distress that occurs as the results of last quarter or the last 2 quarters start to come in and get digested. And there are contractual relationships that are going to be put under a lot of stress. So this second wave is going to be one where lenders and landlords and capital leaseholders are going to be really working to figure out how do we move into some sort of a stasis so that we can get through. And any company that's willing to confront that fairly straightforwardly is gonna find it, hopefully, I suspect most companies are gonna find that relatively easy to deal with, because look, frankly, the wave isn't a wave, it's a tsunami of distress that all these institutions and companies have to deal with. And so anything that can be done to park an issue, if a bank can amend and extend a loan and feel reasonably comfortable that that's the right choice, they're going to do it, because there's just too much going on and they've got too many problems to deal with. So everybody's in that same situation. Yeah. So there's this second phase that we'll experience, or that we are experiencing right now. And that second phase is going to be painful, and it's going to be a shift in where business is done. But it's going to quickly lead to a third phase. And that's going to come in probably Q4 of this year. And Q4 is do I know it's Q4? It may be Q3, it may be Q1, but this third phase is going to be where we see the effect of the sustained shift in demand, right? You're going to have a sustained drop in demand. There's no V-shaped demand curve for a lot of these businesses. Yeah. And especially the longer that COVID-19 stays kind of out of control, and the longer there's uncertainty about that, the longer that demand shift is going to last. And as that settles in, it's going to have a lot of trickle-down effects on the way business gets run. And then phase 1 and phase 2 have kind of piled up this effect of distress. And a lot of it is going to be dealt with by just kicking the can down the road. And you're going to see that in Q3, Q4, Q1, those things start to compound with the demand drop and the sector shift of business. And that's when there's going to be a real painful period for a lot of companies and a lot of industries, because there's not going to be anything to do. The cash resources will have been exhausted. The balance sheets are going to be weakened. The lenders and landlords that have weak balance sheets are going to be exposed. Everybody's going to be in a heightened state of distress and concern about each individual problem. And everybody will be, the sensitivity to individual issues will increase over time in a lot of these industries. So it's going to be very tumultuous as we go through this third phase, and then we'll get into a fourth phase, which we're going to call the new normal. And that new normal is very, very hard to predict, but there's likely to be a lasting change in certain industries. And I think we can all see that in probably commercial real estate right now, maybe the best example or the easiest example to see, where we're all working from home. Everybody's used to looking at the backdrop in the Zoom call or whatever it is, and it's all gotten very interesting. But we've all found that in a lot of places where we didn't think it could be productive, it's really pretty productive. So what is the long-term effect that has on the commercial real estate business? It's going to be seismic. It really will. A lot of the largest law firms in the country that I've talked to are saying, look, we've had great productivity in our work at home environment that we've had over the last couple of quarters. And frankly, maybe we need to reassess the kind of space that we have. Now there you're talking about some of the most important commercial leases that there are, right? So if that's going on and the lenders are doing the same sort of thing, and you see a lot of those kinds of effects move into the economy overall for the next couple of years, those kinds of things are going to change the way we work.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. So just to kind of recap, you're saying phase one, the great pause, has kind of already come and gone. We've paused. We said, wait, we can't just stop working. We've got to carry forward. But there was some fallout from that, right? Which led to cash flow deterioration, which was the phase two. And then, of course, phase three is going to be this sort of precipitation of that cash flow deterioration and a cascade across several different markets. You're going to have winners and losers, but you're then going to quickly, I think, and I say quickly, I mean, at this point in our lives, 6 months to a year is a pretty short period of time, right? So within 6 months, we should start to see what is developing as the new normal. Does that sound about right?
I'm not sure it's 6 months. I don't know. I think it may be Q2 and beyond of next year, if I were to put a date on it, because there's a lot of things that have to shake out. The presidential election has to shake out, and the results of all of that. We have to find out what happens with COVID. Is there going to be a treatment regime or a set of treatment regimes that are found to be pretty effective? Will there be a vaccine? Will the vaccine actually be popular enough to be effective? How long will the immunity last? All of those things really need to be known before we get to the point that the new normal can really be established.
I see.
So I put it Q2 and beyond. Okay.
Yeah. So we've got, that gives us, about 12 months of some pretty hard work, but also a little bit of ambiguity out there in the market, right?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think we're going to see volatility. We're going to see continuing ambiguity, and there's opportunity in that, but it's not going to be an easy year for anybody, I don't think.
Well, let's talk about some of those opportunities, and I think we can start by maybe I'd like to ask, what additional advice do you have for business leaders who are trying to get in front of these phases of decline?
Oh, well, look, there's a lot that you can focus on, but ultimately, if you're not in a sector that is experiencing growth as a result of this, which is most of us, if you're experiencing stress or distress, then it's really critical to focus on cash and cash flow. Cash flow is what kills businesses.
Yeah.
And as long as there's cash flow, as long as there is the ability to make payroll and take care of your people, then The rest can be dealt with. But as soon as you don't have the cash flow to make payroll, you are in very serious and urgent risk of dying as a business. So how do you really focus on cash flow in this sort of a situation? Well, I mean, look, obviously, if you can build demand and get new sources of cash coming into the business, that's great. And you might have to be very creative about how you do that. You might have to look to strategic alternatives that in the past have been, you know, too weak or not valuable enough to be worth considering, but now they may be the thing that are critical to saving your business. So focus on demand where you can, find demand where you can, and go and service that demand. Bring cash into the business. Accept lower margins if you have to, but be careful that your margins don't go negative, because you can't from a cash flow standpoint, you can't afford to support negative margins. So that's one. Beyond that, you immediately turn to, okay, how can you cut costs and make your costs, your outlays as effective as possible. And that gets to be a really painful conversation. But the reality is you kind of have to have that conversation, because the amount of cash that's going out of the business is going to determine how far you can get on your balance sheet. And that's the third piece of it, is how can you affect your balance sheet in a way that will help your cash flow? So you may have assets that you have the ability to monetize that, look, the valuations may not be what you want. They may be strategic assets that would be useful in the long term. But if you're in a state where you've got to make decisions about survival, then some of those long-term strategic goals are going to have to be set aside. And if you've got some power and some ability to use your balance sheet to support your cash flow, you need to do that. And then the last piece of it is how do you really look at some unique ways to use your balance sheet in today's environment. And there are some government programs that might help with this. There's going to be new ones that come up. Some of them will be at a state and local level. One of them that's interesting that's just come open on the Fed level is the Main Street lending program, where they're lending, at least they are trying to lend on cash flow from 2019. So there may be places where you can go to bring cash into the business to help you get through this cycle or these phases that we've been talking about. But ultimately, it's cash. Cash is king right now, and it's going to be king for the next 9 months to a year.
We talk a lot about companies pivoting, and one of the things that's come up in conversation is this this concept that if you're in your client's supply chain and somehow you're seeing that demand wane a little bit, you had suggested maybe there was a strategy for getting in front of that and reworking the demand for your product or your service. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Oh, sure. Supply chain stress is something that's really critical, and I think a lot of people have been thinking about it for the last few months, and maybe for the first time. Yeah. But supply chain stress is going to affect. There's two groups that are going to affect the most immediately, and they're probably already dealing with it, already have. So if you're a single source supplier to a particular customer, then especially if you've got some reason that there's been supply chain disruption, then that customer is likely to second source you, or maybe even third and fourth source you, right? They're going to diversify their supply. And so your demand from that customer might drop dramatically over the next few weeks or months. Well, every other customer that's in that market is going to do the same thing. So if you've got a competitor that had a pretty large share of another customer's market, go knock on their door, right? Go find those other customers that need second and third suppliers and become that second and third supplier for whatever it is, and do that quickly. The faster you're there to solve their problem, the quicker you are in a position to build up some level of relationship and trust with them. And then also turn around and look backwards into your supply chain and do the same thing, right? If you've got supply chain risk because you've got concentration with a particular supplier, or if you can see through your supply chain and see that maybe one of your suppliers might have risk buried in their supply chain, go find that and sort it, right? Get yourself geographically dispersed, multiple suppliers, especially for mission critical stuff, so that you know that you can continue to operate through whatever comes. Because, you know, we're going to see, and this isn't hard to predict at this point, right? We're going to see a shifting reality in terms of what countries are open and what geographies are open. And so you can't simply base your decisions in terms of supply on relationships and pricing. That just doesn't work anymore.
Gotcha. So I'm hearing a lot of get your balance sheet, you know, figured out, see where you can cut costs or at least contain costs within your operation. Make sure that you are focused on your supply chain, focused on your clients, and even continue to build new clients. You know, I think that was a big misnomer early on, that somehow people were, you know, not willing to do business, or they didn't want to take a meeting or whatever. But we found that to be exactly the opposite. People wanted to stay in business. They wanted to hear from their vendors, and so keeping your sales team engaged and moving forward is huge. But cutting expenses hard and fast is a really important piece of that puzzle. Would you agree?
Oh yeah, it is. It has to be, and this is the most painful conversation, right? Because you're talking about really affecting people's lives at a time where uncertainty is tremendously harmful. And so many people are worried about losing their jobs, and yet here we are as a business community. We have to talk about whether or not we can maintain jobs.
Yeah.
And the reality is, if there is distress in the business now, it is extremely important for the business to cut hard and fast and deep. And normally you have conversations about this, and you kind of use the metaphor of, look, do we want to cut into the muscle, right? We might cut out some fat from the business, but do we want to cut into the muscle? And what I would say is, this is the kind of distress where we actually need to chip away at the bone a little bit.
Yeah.
And it's a horrible message to deliver. It's because it has dramatic effect on people's lives, on families, and you can't deny that. And so you have to be compassionate while you do this. You have to provide as much support as you can to people, and yet you have to take these hard decisions, because look, it is a lot easier to say, wow, we cut too deep and we're going to have to rebuild because demand is better than we thought it was, or cash flow is better than we thought it was, and we can actually afford to bring some people back. That is a much easier problem to solve than, we didn't cut deep enough and now we're going to have to cut again. And so we're going to, we're now going to put everybody in the workforce in a position of distrust, because they're not going to believe, they can't afford to believe that the second time is the last time. Yeah. Versus if you go once and you go hard, and you can really straightforwardly say to everybody in the workforce, we've done what we have to do and the pain is over and we can all look to the future now. That is easier to deal with in the future. It's harder to deal with in the present. And you can't deny that.
I agree, but at the same time, these are hard decisions, right? So what we're kind of dancing around is that going back to that taking care of people. And I think it's a good segue to start talking about some opportunities that people have utilized. so the PPP loan was designed to at least keep employees in place for a period of time so that we could kind of shake this out. Companies could start to build up their war chest and really start to prepare for possibly a protracted economic strain on their company. But there are a couple of things out there that I think are a little understood. In particular, you and I have talked a lot about the SBRA. Can you explain to us what the SBRA is and how that is?
Yeah. So the SBRA is the Small Business Restructuring Act. So what we're talking about here is bankruptcy and bankruptcy law in the United States. And I'll just first say that Chapter 11 bankruptcy is kind of it's a magic thing that allows businesses to survive and move through times like this and into the future. But historically, right, Chapter 11 has really only been available to pretty large firms, so middle market and above. And that's because it's an incredibly expensive process. And it's a challenging process. It's complicated. It takes a suite of advisors that are pretty capable and adept in order to negotiate it and to come out successfully. And there's one key factor that I'll say about Chapter 11, which is if you know how you're going to get out before you go in, then you have a good chance. If you don't know how you're going to get out before you file your petition, you're not likely to come out. So it's not like you can just run to the emergency room. But the SBRA might change that. So the SBRA is the Small Business Restructuring Act, and it was passed in August of 2019, and coincidentally came into effect in February of this year. And I say coincidentally because it has really changed the law in some profound ways. Now, it's for small businesses. Now, the way the law was written, it's for businesses with debt of like $2.5 million or less. But the CARES Act, which gave us PPP and some of the other changes that government support that's been happening over the last few months, the CARES Act also changed the limit for the SBRA to $7.5 million for only 1 year. Now, what that means is if you have $7.5 million or less of total debt and claims, then you have access to this SBRA. And in the SBRA, you can do some real magic. Specifically, you can get a plan of reorganization through without any single creditor voting for it. Nobody has to agree. The judge is the only one who has to agree, and all the judge has to do is say, this is fair and reasonable. So you've got to have somebody who can tell the judge that that's fair and reasonable. But if it is fair and reasonable, then you can get a plan through. The plan has to say that you're going to take 3 years, maybe as much as 5 years, of your excess cash flow, let's call it. Okay, so your anything above the minimum cost level to run the business is going to be this excess cash flow component. So you're going to have to take 3 years of that and pay it out to your creditors. But equity gets to continue to own the business the way they own the business now. So what you've done is create a variable note that's 3 years that allows you to buy your business back no matter what the performance is during those 3 years. It's incredible.
Yeah.
It's really incredible. So if you look at that and then say, well, I don't know when demand is going to come back. I don't know what my excess performance is going to look like. Well, the law allows you to project on what you see. And if what you see is pretty opaque and your crystal ball isn't any clearer than anybody else's, then you can go into this saying, I'm very uncertain. I have a very, very low projection. And again, you've got a kind of a variable note that comes out of this that allows you to buy your business back after 3 years. And in 3 years, you'll own it free and clear. So it sounds ridiculously magical. And I have to say, it's unbelievable to me that this law came into effect in February with what has turned out to be kind of ridiculously good timing. I also give the lawmakers some credit for extending that limit to 7.5 million, even if it is only for 1 year.
Yeah.
But this is a tool that could really help a lot of businesses. It could make a huge difference to people, especially at the small end of the scale where they haven't been able to access Chapter 11 before.
Yeah. So kind of moving forward, and then I'd like to circle back and talk a little bit about the Main Street Loan Facility, but I want to at least address this question we've discussed, and here it is. What are some of the key areas to watch over the next few months to determine if a business is going to experience distress, and when will they know they're out of the woods?
Oh, yeah. So, I mean, we got to go back to cash flow, cash flow, cash flow. I mean, if you've got a strong balance sheet and you've got the ability to use your balance sheet to get through the next few months, use it. This is the time. This is the place, right? If you're seeing significant regulatory pressure, if you've got demand issues, which is going to be massive sectors of the economy, right? I mean, so many businesses are going to continue to feel demand problems.
Yeah.
So that's where the stress comes from, because those are the things that generate the cash flow problems, and the cash flow is really what kills the business. So if you don't do anything else, get a cash flow projection, and get a cash flow projection that is built on a non-accrual basis, on a checkbook accounting basis, just like you run your house, right? Because the accruals can really, they can create surprises that will, they'll hurt. So think about your insurance payments or something like that, right? They come along once a year, and maybe you finance your insurance, but you still got a fairly large payment that one time. And if you don't finance your insurance payment, once a year, that's going to hit your cash flow, and it's going to be a big hit, and you've got to pay it, right? You've got to have insurance. You cannot operate without it. And if you don't pay it, you lose your coverage. So these are mission critical things. So you've got to find those things that are in your accrual accounting and strip them out of your cash flow. Make sure that you're projecting your cash flow properly so you're not surprised. And get that cash flow process working so that you're projecting cash flow and you're updating it on a weekly basis, so you know over the next 6, 8, 10, 12 weeks, are you going to be okay? Are you going to be able to make payroll? Where's the pain that you're going to feel? Where do you need to get a little more help from your suppliers, or maybe you can give your suppliers a little bit more help? And then look up and down in your customer base. You know, look for problems in your customers and where they may have distress. And you might have, if you've got accounts receivable risk, you need to surface it early before it becomes a problem, right? If you've got supply risk and you've got a supplier that might fail, you've got to be able to pivot and move to somebody else. So there's a lot of risk mitigation strategies that need to be employed and done deliberately. Right? You can't do this stuff on kind of an ad hoc basis and get away with it, because something will bite you, and it's the surprises that are really painful.
Yeah, that's fantastic advice. So just a real quick, at what point do they start to kind of relax a little bit, where business leaders can say, okay, we've sort of gotten through the bulk of this, and you know, our customer base is good. Things seem to be moving. We've done this triage assessment of our business. When are they going to start to relax and feel good about the economy and the state of their business?
I think there's a few things that you need in order to sleep at night. You need to know that your week in, week out cash flow is at least neutral, if not positive, right? Okay. If you're to that stage, that's step one. you need to know that you have a war chest, right? And that war chest is a pile of cash that you have that you can use when something goes wrong, or if the fights get too big. And you know, you can end up in fights with customers, with suppliers, with lenders, with landlords, and it doesn't matter who you are, right? I mean, lenders fight with lenders all the time, and that is that's the same dynamic that drives all of us. So you've got to get a war chest in place that allows you to fight a battle, and still survive. You know, still make payroll on a weekly basis or whatever it is. And then the last thing is, when you've gone through your balance sheet and gotten it to the point that it's stable. And if your balance sheet is upside down right now, that doesn't mean it can't be stable. So you can be underwater, you can be technically insolvent, you can be in a position where you don't know how you're going to pay your landlord, you don't know how you're going to service your loans. But if you go to your landlord and you go to your lender and you work out an agreement that says, this is a time of ridiculous uncertainty. None of us knows what's going to happen. And I think you, landlord, would rather have a tenant than a claim, and especially a claim in a bad case that's, you know, going to go poorly, right? If you'd rather have a tenant than a claim, then let's work something out now. Same thing with your lender. If your lender would rather have a loan, even if that loan is in pretty bad shape, they may be willing to amend and extend and get you through to some kind of other side, whatever it is, especially if they know that you're working hard on it. And I mean, look, their balance sheets are going to be under pressure too. Your landlord may be owned by a REIT, and they may be levered up, and they may not have the ability to give you the kind of time that they'd like to. They may have so much pressure from their lenders that they don't have any flexibility. So you're going to have to go and have those conversations in order to find out what the landscape is, and then inside that landscape, sort out what the solutions are. And that's true with suppliers and customers. You know, it's true with your employees, right? Some of your employees may say, look, I'm doing okay, and I can take a pay cut. Others of your employees may be on the ragged edge, and they may not be able to live with that. And you've got to sort through those things almost one at a time, because you know, in the world that we're in, unfortunately, there are not going to be simple solutions.
Yeah, I hear you saying that the communication with your key partners, whether that be your employees or your lender or your landlord, is really the name of the game here. You know, staying in constant communication, keeping them informed about what's going on, even if the news is bad. But obviously, if the news is good, that's an easy conversation. Most people are shying away from the hard conversations, right?
Right. Yeah. Nobody wants to have the hard conversations, but the hard conversations are the most important. And the best advice I think you can give you about those hard conversations is be humble, right? Communicate more than you think you should, and be willing to change and say, look, nobody has a crystal ball. Nobody can predict the future. And so, you know, just be honest about that and say, look, circumstances are going to be different than what we expect. We've done the best we can to project out the future, and we're taking decisions that we have to take, and some of these are painful. As we get better data, as things roll forward, we're going to change, and we're going to adapt to whatever the circumstances are. And hopefully those changes will be for the better. Hopefully we'll be able to bring good news next time.
Yeah. I think it's the business owners that keep those lines of communications open, that show the best faith in being able to deliver on those promises down the road.
Absolutely.
Too.
Absolutely.
So should we be looking to government at any level to provide any additional ongoing support to small and medium-sized businesses?
This one's tough because because predicting what the government's going to do is really hard, and then predicting how it's going to work once they do it is even harder. PPP is a great example, right? PPP showed up, and you know, the first round was consumed in, I think it was 10 or 11 days, and you had massive institutions, right? I had one of the largest lenders tell me that they were getting applications for PPP loans at the rate of 1,000 per minute.
Oh my gosh.
1,000 applications per minute at one bank, right? I mean, it's a nationwide huge monster bank, but still, that's an unbelievable number. So you do the math and you actually try to peel that thing apart, and it turns out it's a reasonable number. It's real. Well, they're not set up to handle that. They can't deal with that. That's a volume that's completely impossible to digest. So will government support come? Sure. Will it happen at the state and local level? Possibly. Will it be useful? Maybe. And will you have access to it? You can't assume that you will. So you have to, in order to be prudent, you have to say, I'm going to survive without government support, and here's how we're going to do it. And you're going to keep your ear to the ground and look for the support where you can and access it when you can.
That's fantastic. So speaking of, and I'm going to give you, this will be at your discretion on whether you want to open this up, but we asked the question regarding Main Street Loan Facility, and we actually got an overwhelming number of respondents stating that they were not going to be applying for the Main Street Loans Facility. So do you think that that's still relevant, and should they be looking at it if they're in distress, or is this one of those things that's kind of like 6 1 half dozen the other?
Look, the Main Street Loan Facility sounds really good because the Fed is supposed to buy 95% of the paper on any loan written under the Main Street Facility, and it's based on cash flow multiples from 2019. So the basic building blocks for the Main Street Facility sound great. But what we're finding is the lenders are having a hard time figuring out how to underwrite these loans.
Yeah.
Even though they're keeping 5% of the loans on their book, they're still treating it as if they're keeping the whole thing on from an underwriting perspective. And that's kind of mandated by the Fed, actually. Yeah. So they're requiring, they're requiring small business owners to give personal guarantees and things like that. So it may be vaporware, right? The whole Main Street loan program may be vaporware. It's $600 billion program though, so you can't ignore it. And if you're able to navigate it and access it, it could be the single thing that solves all your problems. I mean, it really could. The loan terms, if you can get one, are pretty good. The cost of capital is not the best in the world, but it's not bad. Okay. And the terms are great.
So we are right up against what we planned for Q&A, but there are a couple of just really important pieces here that I don't want to dismiss. First of all, I've got a closing question for you, but I want you to talk a little bit about, since we're talking about institutional or governmental support rather, talk to me about the wave of insolvencies that you see coming down the pipeline and what that's going to do for small businesses. Just very quickly.
Look, I'm glad you asked this question because this one's really important, and I'll be brief. But the bottom line is there are going to be a lot of insolvencies coming through the process, and the bankruptcy courts could well get overwhelmed. So you're already seeing especially large retailers file. You've seen auto rental companies and that kind of thing. Companies that are very certainly impacted by the lockdown process. So those are already happening, and those are not simple bankruptcies, right? I mean, these are sometimes quite complex. Sure. And the SBRA, if it works like it should, could well bring a whole wave of small business bankruptcies to these courts for the first time ever.
Yeah.
And meanwhile, right, for every business that's thriving right now, there are 10 or 20 or 50 that are in distress. So the courts are likely to get overwhelmed. judges, the bankruptcy judges are already saying that they need more support. They have limited resources in terms of their clerical support. They have limited resources from the United States Trustee's Office. So, if these groups, if these institutions get overwhelmed, then the Chapter 11 process and the restructurings that result of that will change. So the best advice that I can give you is if you can work out a solution that you think will work in bankruptcy, and you feel any likelihood that you're going to use it, especially if you have access to the SBRA, it's going to pay to go early, because 6 months from now or 9 months from now, your ability to get your case through court may be, it may be very different than it is today, and it may be outside your control.
Now, you actually help a lot of your clients stay out of court, right? So if you had just a single piece of advice for a business that sees a struggle on the horizon and is anticipating either a bankruptcy or some other type of distress, what would you say to those business leaders right now?
Yeah, I mean, this is, I don't want to give myself a plug too much here.
It's okay.
At the end of the day, you got to get help, right? You got to get help. This is complicated stuff. It's not simple in the best of times. These are not the best of times. You need a team of support to help you get through this stuff. And that's insolvency attorneys who practice insolvency on a regular basis, right? It's professionals like MeadowLark, and there's a lot of us out there, right? But it's groups like us that can help get firms through this and get through in the best possible way. And sometimes the best possible way isn't that much fun.
Yeah.
But with the SBRA and some other tools that are out there, there may be some good solutions that you can find if you go get the right advice.
Frankly, in our talks, I've learned a lot, and what I've learned is that some of these solutions don't have to be all that complicated. Sometimes you just need somebody to kind of guide you through having the conversations, when to notify certain people like landlords of distressed situations, and you've got a roadmap set up. It helps to have somebody who's sort of been through the trenches, right?
Yeah, it does.
So,
it really does.
That said, we've really just got a couple of minutes here, and I'm hoping that Dylan has a couple of good questions that we can bring to the table from our panel. I mean, from our attendees. But John, I can't thank you enough. This was a fantastic talk.
Well, it's been a lot of fun, Dave. It's been a lot of fun.
Good. So with that, I'd like to...
Hopefully some of this is helpful to somebody.
It's helped me. I mean, there's a start. It's helped me better understand how to serve even my clients too. So thanks. Dylan, did you have a couple of questions for us that we'd like to bring up?
Yeah. What does the unemployment picture look like if we have a vaccine for 2021?
Oh, that's a great question. The unemployment picture with a vaccine is probably, I mean, this is my prognostication, but it's probably no different than if we don't have a vaccine, because I think that the reality of the vaccine world in the US is that the take-up is going to be limited. Is it 60% or is it 80% or is it 40%? Who knows? But at whatever those numbers are, it's still likely that there will be the ongoing problem of how do you deal with the virus and what it means to your business, to your customers, to your employees, to health and safety. And the other side of it is there's likely to be an evolving liability regime in the US. I mean, who knows what the liability is going to shake out to be. There isn't any case law on how a pandemic affects corporate liability. So, the vaccines, I think we all hope that there's a great effective vaccine that comes up quickly, but the reality is, much like everything else that we've talked about, you as a business are not going to be in control of that, so you have to assume it's not going to be helpful.
That's great. That's great advice.
Next question. Pre-COVID, strategic decisioning through shocks and downturns has in the past proven pretty important for executive leadership. Is this a time to be strategic, or is it simply a tactical perfect storm to survive? And if it is strategic, what should be the key focuses to do?
So another good question, and my opinion about strategy is that there's never a time to put down strategy. You have to be strategic. But your strategy might pivot to be much more opportunistic. And you also have to look and say, okay, in terms of the strategic investments that you made over the last 6 months or 2 years, whatever you've been working on that had long-term goals attached to it, are those goals attainable in this world, or do you have to abandon some strategic priorities that you had? Do you have to go look and develop new strategic priorities that are going to bring cash flow in the short term? So there's never a time not to be strategic, because you have to say to everybody involved in your workforce, this is the direction that we're going, and we all need to be going in this direction. And it's strategy that does that. The best strategies give everybody in the company an ability to make decisions on their own about whether or not they're doing the right thing. They give everybody in the company the ability to take action and know that that action is moving toward the common goal. And if you don't have a strategy that's actionable in that way, then you don't really have a strategy at all.
That's fantastic. And I'd just like to say we're at 4:01, and I've still got just one really important point here that was made that if it's all right with you, John, I'd like to speak to briefly, and then otherwise we will probably start to see people drop off the call. Keep in mind, everyone, that this is recorded, and we'll be providing you with a link for that. But John, if it's all right with you, do you mind if I read this comment from Robin? Productivity might be great, but what about the talent not being happy with the continued work from home? Which is a really interesting point that you don't hear a whole lot of. Hearing from lots of individuals that the novelty is sort of worn off. They want back in the office, lawyers especially. I wonder if Robin is an attorney. Or they want both. But culture continues to be the issue, as does training. Very hard to do remotely. And I wanted to just mention that there are tools out there to help you manage, not just manage people remotely, but also to help people with their sort of the mental health challenges that they have that come from working from home. I can tell you definitively, I don't love working from home, and it's not because I'm here with my wife and daughter all the time. That's fantastic. It's because I'm not as productive when I'm at home. That's me. I always felt like I was a sort of an outlier in that respect. Even when I was in real estate, I went into the office every single day. I was the first one in, last one out. I just worked better there. But a lot of people do want to get back into the office. And, but if we can't, there are tools. There are employee assistant programs that you can dive into. There are training and development tools to keep people engaged. But one of the things that we like to talk about at Insperity is, and to your point earlier, John, about communicating with your lenders and landlords, over communicate. Talk with them often. I talked to my district manager. Today is actually a one-off. I haven't really spoken with him on the phone today, but I oftentimes speak to him 2 or 3 times a day. It helps me a lot. It helps me feel engaged with the team. We have regular Zoom meetings. There is a way to do this. If you've got questions about that, reach out to me in particular. I can help. Dylan, that said, do we have any other questions that we need to address before we say thank you and farewell to you guys today?
John, do you want to discuss or explain the disconnect that is happening on Main Street versus Wall Street?
That's a hard one.
We sort of stepped in that one with our polling
I can talk to it a little bit. Look, there is a tremendous amount of liquidity in the investing world, and the amount of liquidity that's in the investing world is always in search, maybe even in desperate search of some return. So there are a lot of buyers for securities. And I just think it's really important to recognize that the amount of institutional money that's out there that is propping up the market, combined with the Fed's programs. I mean, the Fed is buying securities that we never imagined the Fed would buy. So you can't let that affect your thinking about what's going on in your business in Main Street, right? Main Street's problems are the real problems. Main Street problems are the problems that you're talking about with your employees, and that's reality. The liquidity that's in the public markets is not going to solve a lot of problems because it's very hard to get that liquidity into deals on a corporate level, into private deals. It's very difficult. Lenders are lending right now, there's no doubt about it. Everybody's open for business, but how many loans are they really writing? It's hard to see a lot of them being written in the near future.
Well, John, just sincerely, thank you so much for joining us today and helping drive this conversation. I personally have learned so much. I also want to do a special thank you to Dylan, who has been so tenacious in getting this webinar put together. You've been a fantastic partner to work with through this process, Dylan. I want to say thank you again to ACG Austin San Antonio, ACG NextGen, and even ACG DFW. Thanks for joining today. I'd also like to say thank you again to TextChange. These organizations are bringing business leaders together to solve these problems, and that's why we're talking about this today. So with that, I will say thank you one last time.
It's absolutely my pleasure. It's been a real joy. And again, I hope people got something out of this. Dave, thanks a lot for putting this together and helping put this on.
You bet. My pleasure. Well, we'll talk soon, I'm sure.
Okay.